I'm so excited to introduce Samara. I told her while we were getting ready for her talk and kind of discussing the topic that I really wish I had seen this talk 4 years ago when I was setting up my own program. And I think it really connects nicely to some of the themes that we talked about already. The talk previously about connecting into M&A and integrating with sort of a non-traditional group. So I think Samara is going to expand on that, and I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So thanks, Samara.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Appreciate the intro. So first CTI presentation here. So be nice to me, okay, guys? I'm just here to have some fun, share some content, okay? I am manager of threat operations, so I am responsible for vulnerability management and threat intelligence, right? And that's just, it's a beautiful marriage between the two. I work at Cardinal Health, so I like to call it the silent giant. It's a Fortune 14 company, okay? Like every time I talk about Cardinal Health and how huge it is, people are like, huh? Who is that? So we are healthcare's most trusted partner is what we like to say. So we are global, well over 100K assets and plenty of attack vectors across pharmaceuticals, medical devices, supply chains. So let's get into it. Oh, okay. A little bit about me. So I'll zoom through this, but what I like to tell people is that if you don't appreciate my talk, we can at least talk about something else, right? We have something in common. So I'll start with the top left. I like to binge anything and everything. So lately it's been Netflix, but mostly it's like Hulu, things like that, right? I played basketball in college for a couple of years, but I ended up finishing online. So if anybody went to those schools, hit me up, let's talk about it. I love meeting alumni. So I'm a huge Kobe Bryant fan. I played basketball in college, right? So January 2020 was tough for me. On the bottom, these are my puppers here. They're the cutest. I also have 3 kids, but I don't like putting their faces everywhere. So, and a wife, but she would kill me if I put her face because it would be huge right in the center of the slide. I am also originally from Texas. I live in Ohio now. So any other Ohioans out there, hit me up. Let's talk about it. I always put the Texas flag on here though, because when you're very young, they brainwash you to be proud. So here I am, a product of that. So getting into it, threat intelligence. Now to the top left here is my sort of definition I give people outside of our org, right? So consumption of generation of information an organization uses to understand the threats targeting the organization. You disseminate that information and inspire action to drive protection and defense. I know what you guys are thinking, especially seasoned folks out there. Intelligence is not information. I agree with you, but I hate to break it to you. The people outside of our org, they see it as information. It is our job to show them that it's intelligence. So this could be a refresher for some people, GIRs versus PIRs. So I'm going to zoom through a lot of this, but general intelligence requirements, GIRs, are sort of general threats that we care about across our industry. Priority intelligence requirements sort of hones in on your company and what is important to you, threats that might be targeting your organization. So we'll talk more about that in a bit. The CTI lifecycle. So when I give examples here, you'll be able to identify sort of, what area of the life cycle, I'm kind of referencing, but very quickly, direction is what are we doing? What are we talking about? Who are we talking about? What GIRs or PIRs are we focused in on? Collection, going around to the right, is what are we collecting? How are we collecting it? Maybe it's deep dark web, maybe it's an OSINT feed, maybe it's a commercial feed. Processing, how are we collecting it and what are we doing with it? Are we using a SIM? Are we leveraging a tip? Are we integrating it with our SOAR platform? Analysis, this is where we figure out why, what are we doing with it, right? Does it even have context related to our organization? Aspects of MITRE ATT&CK, things of that nature are going to land in analysis. Dissemination, how are we delivering it? What product are we using? Is it a presentation? Is it brief? There's all kinds of ways you can disseminate the information. And feedback, arguably one of the more important aspects of the CTI lifecycle. We had to talk about that. Garrett, he talked about feedback. It's incredibly important. If you don't know what your customers want to hear about, right, and you don't give that to them, they're not going to read your stuff. I actually have a pretty funny story about that. A company I used to work for, back in the day, I'm not going to name names, we ran a test to see if anybody was reading our briefs. So for the month of December, We didn't send any. It was like a weekly thing, right? So very forced until it wasn't my idea, I promise. We stopped delivering those briefs for an entire month, and nobody said anything until January 15th, like mid-January. It was very telling. So that was a huge learning experience for me. Next up, so the Intel partnerships. I'm going to lightly touch on some of the traditional partnerships, which I believe these are my opinion based on talking to other intelligence organizations, is security operations, incident response, security leadership. I delineated security leadership specifically because I'm talking about directors, VPs, SVPs, your CISO, red team, vulnerability management, and fraud prevention. This shouldn't surprise anybody, but if some of these traditional partnerships aren't, partners you generally partner with, then let me know. Let's talk about it. Now, less traditional partners, partners that my team partners with, and we put a little bit more, emphasis on these than some of the more traditional ones, are threat modeling, executive leadership. Okay, so that's like, depending on where your CISO is, it's unfortunately is a lot of the times above the CISO. Governance, risk, and compliance with an emphasis on third-party risk. Business information security officers, which is BISOs. DevSecOps / AppSec. Again, kind of depends on how your organization is structured. And then security, architecture, and engineering. So really quick, before we go into the partnerships, let's talk, again, another refresher for a lot of people out there, but I encourage you all to look up the types of intelligence if you don't know them already. So tactical, when I talk about tactical intelligence, I'm talking about TTPs, I'm talking about infrastructure, right? And now I'm going to use that icon there. Operational, we're talking about specific attacks or campaigns targeting an organization. That can include intent, motivation, capability, things of that nature. Strategic, got the little chess piece there. That's going to be more sort of broad and threat landscape based. Maybe, I don't like to say it's going to go to less technical partners, but that is sort of how it's described for a lot of people. So running through the traditional partnerships really quick. So I hope not to offend anybody, but I'm going to squish security operations with incident response. A lot of companies do that. They're on the same team. Maybe it's a rotational, maybe there's more senior people doing incident response. But the key word with these partners is context, right? So when we talk about tactical intelligence, tactics, techniques, procedures, infrastructure, we need to add context to that. Otherwise, it's just information, kind of like before. We can definitely make these teams' lives easier by minimizing. Okay, I forgot to mention, I'm going to say a lot of buzzwords in here, and I'd love for somebody to keep count. I think it would be kind of hilarious because it's something I'm working on. So when we talk about minimizing alert fatigue, okay, security operations, incident response, threat intelligence can do that. So arguably, and if you disagree with me, please let me know. I think a lot of threat intelligence going to these teams can be automated, right? I think we can do that. I think we can make it happen. I personally really like the intelligence we get from these teams. So I do like a nice mutual relationship between a threat intelligence team and their partner. For security leadership, I have a lot of strong opinions here. I have a lot of strong opinions in general, so I'm not going to say that the rest of it. You're just going to hear a lot of them. So security leadership, I talked about this being directors, VPs, SVPs, CISOs. If you do not have some sort of direct contact with your CISO, okay? If you are a manager of an intelligence team or a director of an intelligence team, and you are not letting your intelligence team interact with the CISO, you are doing the entire organization a disservice, okay? Threat intelligence should be assisting a CISO without anything lost in translation to make actionable informed decisions, okay? We can also make our CISOs' lives easier. So I call this red star on the side, our red star remember. Something y'all can take away. Some good advice from Kristen. Appreciate it. So next, continuing on with the traditional partnerships. Red team, we got tactical intelligence right there. TTPs, infrastructure. That relationship there it's just organic, right? we report on something, we tell them, hey, this is kind of hot and cool, something sexy, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. Your red team is always down, right? Always down. Vulnerability management. I will try to be brief on this because this is sort of my bread and butter. This is what threat operations is made of. My threat intelligence team partners directly with our vulnerability management team to not only make their lives easier, but to create a risk-focused environment. I talked about Cardinal Health having over 100K assets, right? Well over that. That can get kind of tough when vulnerabilities are released and, there's these 0 days, but then, you've got attackers that are exploiting, CVEs from 5 years ago. So to stay on top of that, we have a custom risk framework that we use, okay? This is all true, it's super cool too. We use different aspects of threat intelligence, right? Collecting data on the sophistication of the attack. It is our vulnerability on the perimeter. How many assets is it, impacting? What are the other ones? I'm missing them. Somebody out there. So there's somebody on my team out there that can include them. But essentially, we have a custom risk score that is tied to a custom patching cycle, and I'll be talking about that a little further throughout the presentation as well. Fraud prevention. There's a ton of people out there who are much smarter than I am on fraud prevention. So I'm talking as simple as like social media monitoring, brand monitoring. There's a lot threat intelligence can do in terms of collecting that data to help our fraud teams. So our red star, remember, create a risk-focused environment. I strongly believe that a threat intelligence team is collecting all of this context so we can better understand what our technical cybersecurity threat, risk, whatever you want to call it, truly is. Threat modeling. So we've transitioned to what I believe to be the less traditional threat intelligence partners. So some teams have like dedicated threat modeling teams. It's super cool and a little uncommon. Other teams like app security, red teams, threat intelligence, incident response, they have their own sort of threat modeling within their function, and that's totally cool too. But threat intelligence should have direct involvement, okay, in threat modeling. So we can, from a tactical perspective, develop attack chains based on exposure, right? So what does that even mean? From my perspective, that means vulnerability. We know everything about our internal soft and squishy, right? We have our threat intelligence team who knows everything about what's going on external to our environment. When we put those two things together, leveraging something like MITRE ATT&CK, we can sort of build these attack chains and identify where we have some gaps. So that brings me to the strategic aspect. We can track technological and process gaps. Notice I talk about process gaps. Maybe it's because I'm in healthcare, but there are many process and visibility gaps that should be tracked to identify some additional risk, right? So our red star, remember, for this one is see the adversary, be the adversary. It's like a mantra, right? If we know what the adversary is doing, we can be that adversary and we can identify certain weaknesses throughout our environment. So executive leadership. This is something I'm very proud of. Not everyone has the luxury, but having that direct line to the CISO, having the CISO's report, having a CISO that believes in threat intelligence, these things can happen. You can have a relationship with your executive leadership. We have regular sort of, we have agenda items within their OC meetings. It's awesome, okay? So what we've done from a tactical perspective is something called OSINT projects, okay? This is relatively simple. It's just hardest to get it started, right? So what we did is we talked with our CEO, CIO, CTO, chief legal officer, chief human resource officer, chief diversity officer, whoever, and we dug up as much as we could off the internet on them. We tried to be as creepy as possible. So it was a lot of fun, naturally. We went to, their houses and took pictures, identified some things like, hey, your fence is open in the back. Should probably do something about that. But in all seriousness, it was interesting. It was interesting to put all of that stuff into a presentation and show them, hey, this is what we know about you. We got all of this information for free. and on the deep and dark web, as they know it, you can get even more damaging information for pennies. Okay. So their reactions were actually much better than expected. They took it. Some did something with it. Others, kept posting their vacations and stuff. But what can you do? So that leads me to internal targeted phishing, right? Now, there's a disclaimer here. Not everything on these slides, some of them are just Samara being, a visionary of sorts, but others are, actually on our roadmap. These are one of the things that are on our roadmap. Working with security operations to do internal targeted phishing. We have a lot of the data on them that would make them click on a phishing email. For our CIO, we actually found out what car he drives, the VIN number. We crafted our own phishing email based on him having a recall in his car or something. We actually found a true recall, but kind of drafted this website that was obviously not where you could look at your recall. And he's like, I would totally click on this, right? He was super honest about it, and I love it. But there's benefit in that, right? Getting their eyes open to something like that. So it's part of strategy. Metrics on attack trends, dashboards on compliance, risk exposure. We talked about threat modeling. If we can identify some of those risks, put it in a nice, pretty dashboard with all these cool colors, they love it. Eat that stuff up. So our red star, remember, is make your executives feel cyber smart. Now, if there's executives out there, please don't be offended. But your executives need to feel it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that they are, but they should feel it. They should feel more confident about identifying phishes, right? Being able to sort of identify and ignore social engineering, things of that nature. Governance, risk, and compliance. I think people sleep. They sleep on this area quite a bit. I think it's super cool. So I talked about vulnerability management, having a custom sort of risk model. And I talked about having that custom patching cycle. So the only way, well, I'm not gonna say the only way, but the best way in some cases is to get that in some sort of policy, right? So our threat intelligence team influenced policy creation. We prioritized an update in our patch management policy to say, hey, if your threat intelligence team says this is bad related to vulnerability management and it's affecting your asset, you need to comply with this patching cycle. I was like, that's a win. It's nice to have that to sort of fall back on when people are whining and I don't want to patch it. Well, you need to because of X, right? It's nice to have that. So new definitions of compliance. We bumped up that patching cycle based on that trending vulnerability, as well as tracking the risk we talked about from a threat modeling perspective. And we'll continue to talk more about this. So our red star, remember for this one, honesty is the best policy. I know that's not super original, but it's true, right? Going on to third-party risk. I did include customer risk here. Again, maybe it's because I'm in healthcare, but this is an area that is often overlooked, right? Having an assessment for a vendor isn't enough. You need more, okay? So from a tactical perspective, threat intelligence, the information that we collect, leveraging things like MITRE ATT&CK and some other risk frameworks, we can consult on creating and updating third-party assessments. Now, that's nothing, there's no phenomenon, included in that. But on a quarterly basis, based on what we're seeing, the threat landscape, right? This is a great in, right, with your third-party risk team. Hey, it's no biggie. There's no, action on their part outside of sending you the assessment so you can go through it and provide recommendations. That's generally what we do in general. We can't change their assessment. There's no harm in that, which could lead to these next ones here. So from an operational perspective, assessing exposure of third parties under contract. There are tools out there that can help. You see if there's some soft and squishy on the outside of these third parties, and you can see how long it takes them to fix it, right? Sometimes it's a good sign. Sometimes in healthcare specifically, I don't talk about healthcare, but that's what I'm working in. I worked at another company as well. Healthcare, it's an interesting beast. But if there is a vendor who is offering a product, they are the only vendor that offers said product. Doesn't matter how soft and squishy they are, okay? your company is probably going to invest in it. But right, it might frustrate you, whatever. That's business. Roll with the punches. It's still important to understand the risk associated with partnering with that vendor. Lastly, from a strategic perspective, monitoring and the analysis of third-party compromises. Now, it's very important to have some sort of centralized database where you have all of your third-party, companies or people you do business with or customers, whatever, so that you could say, oh, okay, let me look at this. I see these, compromises happening through whatever source, maybe some keyword alerts. Sometimes you have to prioritize them, based on B2B connections or whatever, right? And track them that way. Unfortunately, sometimes it's all up in somebody's head. That's why the partnership is important, right? For them to unload that information so that we can help them in some form or fashion. Our red star, remember, is stranger danger. We should all be familiar with this as children. I still am. It's very important. But before you do business with somebody, they're a stranger, and you should treat them that way. Next, BSOs. So I'll start with the red star, remember. This is a movie quote, so make sure you comment if you know it. Did we just become best friends? Okay, it's true. BSOs and threat intelligence can be best friends, okay? It's your channel to the business. You can get so much more done if the business knows that you're around, or they know that you exist, I should say. So from a tactical perspective, we have a regional BISO. So thanks, really, Cardinal Health, they kind of jumped on the BISO train early. And we have a BISO for every region of the world that we work in. We also have a BISO for the business units, right? So we have one for corp, medical, and pharma. Regional user education is the first one. So we worked with a particular BISO in charge of the APAC region. He was awesome. He loves threat intelligence, eats it all up. And he reached out to us and said, can you help me identify what's going on in this area of the world? And we're like, yeah, give me 72 hours and we have this product. We delivered the product. Now, what were my expectations out of that? What were his expectations? He was expecting to see the product. Check. I was expecting him to read the product and do what he thought was best for it, okay? We should not get prideful as intelligence analysts and say, use my product. I put this together. You should use everything in it. No, he made it his own. He created his own document, his own how-to on how to identify social engineering and a phishing email, how to report it. He used native language throughout it, okay? This is value that we're talking about. He leveraged threat intelligence information to make it his own and make it digestible for the audience, right? That's a team effort, and it was awesome. At the business unit, from an operational perspective, BEC, right? I want to say it was before like everyone was talking about ransomware and when I mean everyone, I mean like the websites, right? that our CISOs look at and stuff. BEC was super big, and we worked with our corp business or BISO to talk to our finance department and be like, this is what it looks like. We're going to test you on it. So pay attention. Okay. Obviously there was more involved with that, but that partnership, right? The business unit BISOs are huge champions for change, right? Because kind of have to be, they understand the intricacies of the business and how that can impact the organization as a whole. And from a strategic perspective, intelligence is being shared bidirectionally. I talked about having that mutually beneficial relationship. The BISO and the intelligence team, it should be a marriage. They should be in love and going on vacations together and getting their vows renewed every 5 years or so. It should be so much shared back and forth because you can give them what you know about emerging threats. They can give you some like heads up on what the business is working on, right? Because we seem to be surprised by that often. Next, DevSecOps. I also include AppSec because sometimes they run in the same circles, right? This one, red star, remember buzzwords coming. Shift left, secure from the start. If there's other ones, include them in the hallway. Let's talk business or buzzwords. So tactical perspective, I'm gonna zoom through this one too because I'm not an expert, but we do have a great partnership with our AppSec team. And we talk about introducing the threat models from our perspective into the early stages of testing. There's also a mutual relationship here because we have a lot of applications that are big old money makers, things that we've prioritized ourselves, and we can use the information from their threat models in our own, the ones I talked about early on, right? So it's important, even if, so there are some, okay, how am I going to say this? There are some teams that don't think they need you, right? So it's important to sort of, not force your way in there. I'm saying force your way in there and show them how they need you, right? Develop that brief, even if they don't ask for it. We're going to talk about getting buy-in as well, and I can reference AppSec, DevSecOps. Prioritize app vulnerabilities. So, vulnerability management, we obviously, there was a huge, vulnerability that came out, we're still dealing with, no big deal. But, even from a container perspective, it's all very different, right? And I love it. It's a good challenge to have. But, there's not really, you could fix containers and all that, but generally it's a burn and redeploy. So are there processes that you can implement with that team to say, you don't redeploy until you fixed and stop it, right? These are the things, unfortunately, you're strong arming, but they'll start to understand, the importance of it. Lastly, security architecture. I'll try not to spend how much, I got 10 minutes left or so. So we talked about minor attack. If you have a solid relationship with your security architecture team, you should be talking to them on at least a weekly basis, if not daily, in terms of tracking control coverage across tactics and techniques. Now, minor attack has already done a great job helping us out with that, okay? But it's important that these controls are configured properly and that they are tested, right? So it's all this happy, this party between security, architecture, engineering, threat intelligence, your red team or purple team to test these things and actually validate that they're working. Defense in depth analysis. So it's essentially the control mapping with some added things, right? So when I talk about defense in depth, I am also talking about issues with or coverage related to mitigation, those process gaps that I referred to earlier, but also gaps in visibility. Yeah, like I know we talk about you don't know what you don't know, but seriously, let's think about this, okay? Because there are things that we don't have visibility into that are creating like huge gaps, okay? Okay, I'm getting excited now, but you understand what I'm saying. Defense in depth analysis with control mapping, we should have a good idea of our risk exposure. We should be tracking this in some sort of risk register with digestible remediation plans that teams can actually conquer, right? Leveraging our threat modeling team. It's all a happy family, okay? We talk a lot about marriage and family. That's just my thing. So lastly, from a strategic perspective, consult on control acquisition. So in a perfect state, right? This is optimal. We know our control gaps. We know, where we have issues with process. We know where we lack visibility. At that point, we should be able to say, is there a control out there that we can acquire that will help us with this? Ideally, right? Or maybe you make one, So our Red Star, remember, is what does coverage mean to your organization? For us, it means technical controls, mitigating controls, process gaps, visibility gaps. It's important to know what coverage means to your organization. Getting buy-in. I had to throw memes in. I try not to meme you guys to death, but this is one of my favorite, okay? So getting buy-in. Like I said before, having a supportive CISO can make getting buy-in much easier, obviously. So first one we got here, a roadshow. Explain who you are. Everyone does threat intelligence differently. So it's important that you meet with your potential stakeholders and you talk through what they can expect, right? What does threat intelligence mean to Samara? What does it mean to Cardinal Health? What does it mean to our organization as a whole? For the first, I want to say 6 months of my job building the threat intelligence team, it was a roadshow. It was going out and talking to people, making yourself known. We talked about GIRs and PIRs. For each partnership, you should have PIRs. You should know what is important to them so you can reference them when you're going to deliver a brief. Make sure you're checking that box, okay? Well, it's more than checking a box. You got me though. Define goals and timelines. So I'm talking about having this ready before you talk to them, okay? And I'm also not saying that I had all of this down, right? But there were some repercussions that I learned in the process of that roadshow to say, hey, I probably should have said, this is what we plan to do, and this is the expected timeline. So they don't come knocking 3 months later like, hey, what? I've been waiting for this. And you're like, oh, well, priorities have changed. Nobody wants to hear that they're not a priority. Define stakeholder action. It's very important that you manage expectations in terms of what you need from them. And then value proposition. So based on our goals, based on stakeholder action, why should they do any of it? We're all busy, okay? Tell them what value will come of your brief product, whatever you're delivering, and what they should be getting from it, right? Sometimes it's obvious. Other times they're like, yo, my day's full already. I don't need you adding to my workload. So the value proposition is probably most important here outside of the goals and timelines. Lastly, well, this isn't the last slide, but lastly, preventing a toxic relationship. I don't know if you guys know these people in the bottom right. It's a very well-known show on Netflix, but they arguably have the most toxic relationship that there is, okay? How to prevent a toxic relationship. Detailed scope. So this is not only based on the GIRs, PIRs, it's also based on those goals and timelines. So you could say, for the next 12 months, these are our goals. For the next 90 days, this is the scope of our engagement, right? And you deliver on that, okay? And then you can extend it from there. Continuous updating roadmap, okay? So it's important, well, for me, what I did was had our certain partners sort of listed, and then over time, I showed which one would be like a priority in general, right? Going across sort of the calendar year or fiscal year, whichever you guys work with. But it's important to update this continuously, okay? And show, okay, we are ahead here, we're a little behind here, but I think we can make up time here. Like, it's important to keep those lines of communication open, right? You can adjust based on the feedback that you're getting, adjust based on the speed in which you're working, adjust based on ad hoc work that's coming in. This fourth one, y'all, okay, I really need you to listen and hear me. Get the right people in front of the customer, okay? So there are so many people that can work in intelligence, super crazy smart people, okay? Not all of them should be interfacing with a particular customer, okay? It's very important that we sort of pay attention to the psychology and different personality traits, certain people, and maybe we don't put, two Tauruses in a room together, whatever. Feedback, feedback, feedback. I've mentioned this already. I'll mention it again a million times. Make sure those lines of communication are open and you're receiving feedback. This is the last slide, so I'm coming up on time. I realize that. In closing, no intelligence program is created equal. Everyone does it differently. You decide what value you want to bring to what partner and just do it and do it well. Partnership value is dependent on the type of organization. So like I said, we put a little bit more emphasis on some of those strategic relationships as opposed to the more technical sort of indicator-based relationships, because that is our gateway to the business and providing value. Throw these in your 1, 3, 5, your 1 year, 3 year, 5 year goals. I'm not saying go out there and do this now. I'm saying let's start thinking about it. Let's put it on our strategic roadmap. Last slide. There's my Twitter handle. That's my name on LinkedIn. Seriously, outside of the hallway, let's talk. I am super open. I love this topic and I want to help. So feel free to reach out.